Welcome to the Daily Objective. So this is another part in the Fixing Education series. We've talked about new types of universities. We've talked about being active in school boards. There's one area we haven't covered till today, which is homeschooling. So I'm arriving at this topic as an agnostic. I have no knowledge for homeschooling because there's no homeschooling in Greece. One thing I know for sure is that I hated school so much that someone telling me that, hey, you're going to get your education at home, I would totally love this. So, but today, consider this as everything you ever wanted to know about homeschooling answered type of episode. And with us is Jeffrey Frenkel. Jeffrey is a student of objectivism. He's part of the community, but he has more experience with homeschooling. So we thought that we could have a discussion that will answer our questions about homeschooling. So Jeffrey, the first question is, before we get to anything deeper, when people say homeschooling, what does it mean? Does it mean that literally your children are taught at home by a parent, or is it anything which can be more organized, like a teacher comes at home? So what's the most usual form of homeschooling?
Oh, it's interesting because it's usually, there's a very broad range within homeschooling, right? There's a lot of different views. I mean, it encompasses the whole political spectrum, a lot of philosophical ideas there. And you have the whole range of pretty much there's one sect called unschooling, where children are basically it's almost recess, permanent recess. Then you have the religious component, which I think is a lot of, in America, I think there's a big religious component. Parents really don't want their kids exposed to a lot of, the progressive ideology that goes on in the government schools. So they'll take ownership into their own hands. They'll maybe have a school at a church, completely, of course, it's completely private, but again, and then of course there's kind of with my orientation, which is essentially the importance of a real conceptual education, but done at home, right? So there's a curriculum. It's a set curriculum that progresses, of course, as kids get older, and I think that's hopefully the future. I think a lot of innovation in the field is going towards the right areas of education. Expect better curriculums, more thought out. Of course, as objectivists, we have a kind of a unique take on what a good curriculum is and the epistemology that comes with that. But yeah, there's a broad range, and it just depends on the values of the parent and the community that the people are in.
So, but who is usually the teacher? Is it the parent? So in your case, for example, are you the one who is teaching your daughter, or do you bring someone at home, like a private tutor?
So I've been homeschooling my daughter. She's 7 years old now, so technically in first grade, according to the American school system. But yeah, so a little bit of context. So she started off in Montessori when she was 3, and then the pandemic, happened, and of course that shifted a lot of the the way that the schools idealize, right? A lot of parents saw what was going on. I was never going to put my daughter in government schools, but I thought Montessori is really good. And then coincidentally, that happened, and I really got into kind of the idea of homeschooling. Looked at some resources, things of that nature. And then, so luckily, it turns out for me, the teacher that my daughter had, she retired due to the pandemic. She's a little bit older, so she helped out. She helps out a lot with literature and reading, and I actually do the math, science, and history, right? So it's a kind of division of labor. It's been quite a undertaking to become. I'm not a teacher by training. I'm actually a data scientist, numbers, statistics guy. So for me to kind of be oriented towards teaching, it was a really good experience. I mean, I had to kind of just learn on basic pedagogy, basic just communication with kids, right? So I kind of trained myself to become a teacher in a sense. And it's been a wonderful, wonderful experience, but I know there's a lot of different ways that other people can do it. They have what's called micro schools, where they'll basically hire a teacher from like the government school system or public school, and they'll just basically teach a handful of kids, and it's kind of, they'll meet up at different people's houses. It's kind of more of a community-based setting. I'm more of like an individual. We just do it at home, and then, I do follow a set curriculum. And it's kind of rigorous. We have, I give her exams and kind of attest, her knowledge, and it's just a great experience.
So for how long can a kid be homeschooled? So can a kid forever? So including, for example, so can a kid be homeschooled, or attend an alternative micro school, which is something, let's say, closer to homeschool rather than to traditional education. Can a child do this till, let's say, they're 16 or 17?
Yeah, I mean, there's options, of course. I know for a fact, I know I'm in Illinois, so we have standardized testing in 8th grade. I know a lot of homeschoolers do really well in standardized tests, right? Because their education, there's not a lot of time wasted, right? There's a lot more focus on, at least there's a lot more focus on actual knowledge and learning kind of the right things. And there's definitely those standardized tests. And then as the child gets older, high school is going to be interesting. So my daughter is 7 right now, but by the time she's in high school, who knows what the landscape would be? I mean, you can actually sense there's a lot of shift in education, particularly in America, away from schooling, different viable options. A lot of innovation is coming through. So it's really hard to kind of project what's going to happen in high school. But I know even some corporations like Apple, Google, things like that, Elon Musk, they're working on stuff for high school kids, kind of internships. So the goal is, by the time that my daughter gets to that age, who knows what the options will be? There might be something. She's very engineering, tech inclined. She builds. She wants to be an engineer. So it's really interesting how that works out. But of course, I mean, the regular schools are an option, at that point in time. But that's probably the least of what I'd like to do.
Right. So okay. So we know how school works. You show up at 8:30, 9, whatever. First hour, you have maths, then you have literature, then you have a break, then you have geography, sports, whatever. So how does a day in homeschooling look like? So is this something similar? So for example, is it with the schedule? Is there a timetable? Is there a particular duration for classes?
Yeah, so I use it depends on your curriculum, right? So I use for math, I use something called Singapore Math. It's a very conceptually oriented math system designed in Singapore. They've had kind of the best test scores going on decades now. And it's designed for kindergarten through 5th grade. And basically have a lesson a day. They give you, they present the kind of the conceptual part that they want you to work on. Then you have practice problems. And then at the end of every lesson, at the end of every chapter, there's an exam. So we spend probably a good 45 minutes a day just doing math. A lot of times we'll then, my daughter's teacher will come, they'll work on literature, they'll do reading, writing. She's at the stage now where she's just starting to kind of write independently, read some more advanced text. She'll eventually get some more advanced literature. Then we do science. So those 2 things we do every day. We do reading, writing, and math every day, all 5 days a week. And then 2 or 3 days a week, we do science. So I use mystery science. That's a great curriculum. It's actually designed by an objectivist. It's just very conceptual oriented in science. It presents things kind of anti-jargony, right? They give you a conceptual framework and then you do mini lessons. That's a couple of days a week. And then there's some history stuff that I do with her a couple of days a week too, but kind of math, reading, and writing pretty much every day. And the truth is the amount of time it takes, we can start about 9:30 in the morning. By 12:30, we're done for the day. There's not a lot of time wasted. My daughter loves basketball. She will play basketball. I'll take her to the park. Sometimes we'll go to the museum. It's and I actually work in the evening mostly. So I'm one of those people that's fortunate for me to work, that it works out like with my work schedule. But other people may not be as fortunate. They have to get more creative in ways that they want to do it. But yeah, I mean, there's so much time wasted in kind of the regular school day, at the government schools. I mean, it just kind of the distractions, the lunch, all this other stuff, especially within a class, right? A kid gets disruptive, time's wasted, everyone gets distracted. By the time they can refocus, you're talking about 20 minutes gone, and just the amount of time that's it's just not used properly and efficiently. So we cut all that out, just get to work and then get on with our day.
And again, here I'm just with my hat of the interviewer. I have absolutely zero authority on the topic, but this day sounds so much better than my school day, because also I guess when you talk about science, it is also somehow related to the interest of the kid. Or when you talk about literature, it's geared also it's very personalized. It's not so your kid might like Shakespeare more or whatever. Some other kid might like more stories about war, like the Iliad. So you're flexible, obviously, with the curriculum, right?
Yeah, of course. You're going to tailor to the interest of the student, right? So my daughter loves, for example, we're reading a couple of basketball books now. I'm just getting her, I find it for her level. She's just likes reading about that. She loves Elon Musk. She's a big fan. So we kind of got her his biography, like a kid's version of the biography of Elon Musk. we go through that, and she just actually practices reading, but she's engaged, right? She's motivated to learn. It's really interesting to watch that. Yeah, but you'll tailor, she's very interested in science, so it makes it easy. Of course, I think very important of just conceptual education is science, right? You can't ignore reality. We got to learn the kind of the laws of reality, starting with kind of general physics. And if she wasn't scientifically inclined, that might be a little bit of a difficult task, right? Some kids just have natural penchants for different topics. I guess I'm fortunate in that sense that she just really enjoys learning about science and kind of just doing the experiments and things like that. So it comes kind of easy. But there's a scenario where some kids are, maybe much more literature inclined, or kind of not engineering science based, and that might be a different task, which they do still need science, right? I don't think you can ignore it altogether. But the point is that you do have the flexibility to kind of hone in on certain things that the child really enjoys doing.
Right. So now we will move to the second part, which is all the objections. Before we move to objections, just let me say how much I would appreciate in my childhood having something on basketball, not once every day or once every week, once every year. Like, basketball was my passion, and in school, the only thing you could do with basketball is play basketball. But so I never dreamed that you could learn about basketball in a way that it could become your career. If this was an option when I was 10 or even 15, there's no question that this would have been my career path. Okay, so we've praised homeschool or the ideas of homeschool. Now let's go to the usual objections or questions that parents would have. So the first question is, if you're homeschooling your kid, is this a full-time job? So does this mean that the mother or the father need to step out of their career for 10 years or however they will be homeschooling their kids?
Yeah, I guess it does depend, right? So for me, I am fortunate enough that I have a remote job. I work remotely, so I can work in the evenings. My company does know that I do this, so like they're kind of more flexible in that nature. For parents, this definitely comes up, in a lot of my friends. When I try and convince them homeschooling, the main objection is, of course, that they don't have the time. They have both two working parents. Like, what do you do in that point? Well, what I suggest is there's a lot of communities of micro schools, right, or in different groups where you can basically outsource teaching. You have a small group of children, maybe one or two different teachers that come in, and you can hire them. And basically you can rotate houses, you can do different weeks, right? Parents can take turns. The point is, if it's a value to you, right, if it's something that you really find value in, you'll work to innovate ways and come up with ways to accomplish that. I think it's kind of a shortcut and kind of a laziness. That if there's something you want to do, that you just say, you throw your hands up and say, hi, I can't do it. I think there's always a way, right? Especially if it's like something that's really important. Because for me, when I started, I had the same concern. I don't know if I'd be able to, but then it became something that is paramount to my values and what I want for my daughter. So like this was going to happen one way or another. And, and of course I was fortunate, but I did make sure that I took the bull by the horns and made it happen.
So how much of an expert though does a parent have to be? So for example, if you told me to teach even an elementary school kid in maths, I would probably fail in the endeavor. My math level is probably around that of a kid of that age. So how can we trust, who is we, but how can one trust a parent or their own abilities in terms of, for example, teaching science or language? So you mentioned that there are some curricula. So what is this? Is this like a program that you buy? And so how can a parent become a teacher if they're not already a teacher? So what if their expertise is something completely different and now they have to teach literature, math and science?
That's a great question. I can speak from my own experience. I'm not really an expert in anything, related to teaching children, but given that it was so important to me, I actually I looked for different curriculums that kind of, you're not on your own, right? So example, if you're just like, we're going through a book, for example, like a math book with my, let's, for example, imagine like basically an addition component of like a textbook for 7, 8 year olds. I would be really tough if I didn't have a structure, kind of a guide of how to do it. So the good news is there's a lot of stuff out there in the curriculum that you can actually look for, is they kind of guide you through the process, right? And mystery science for science is particularly good at that. You don't actually really need to be an expert at all. They have videos, they have kind of hints. All you need to do is kind of read the night before, be somewhat familiar with with what the experiment, what the goal is, kind of conceptually. right? And then you got to go through it. And it's really self-explanatory. So the best curriculums for homeschool don't assume that you're an expert in that domain, right? Now, of course, as you get older, as the child gets older, the demands, intellectually increase. That might be a different story. Then you might need to get maybe a professional tutor or something along those lines. But by that point, the child has enough knowledge, enough motivation that they're not gonna, that you can actually kind of facilitate that as opposed to provide it directly. But even then, like, for example, I'm very like poor in literature. I don't really know how to pick out themes very well. I have somebody that helps me out with that, right? My daughter's former teacher, right? But if it wasn't her, I would find another resource to do that, right? So you have to kind of know what you're interested in, what your limitations are. You just got to be aware of kind of what the child's also really interested in. But yeah, I mean, there's ways to do it. And, I think it's nothing systematic. I don't think I haven't come across like one comprehensive curriculum that encompasses every domain, every subject area. So I kind of go bits and pieces, but being objectivist, we kind of know what to look for, right? We know how knowledge is structured. We know what to look for in a curriculum. I think that gives me a really good advantage. I think objectivism has a lot to say about what good knowledge is, how a curriculum should be structured. I know I read Leonard Peikoff's Teaching Johnny to Think. That was paramount in kind of what to look for in a curriculum. And I actually spoke with Lisa Van Dam when I started this process a few years ago, and she was very helpful. So, just the point is, if you're kind of resourceful and this is something you really want to do, you'll make it happen.
And you know what everyone is going to, not everyone, what someone who is in favor of socialized schooling is going to say, oh, so a teacher was trained for 4 years for nothing. Well, let me tell you what, 80% of my teachers, to be very generous, I can't think of how they could have been worse without the 4 years of training in terms of pedagogy or in terms of bonding with the kid. Now, of course, I had some teachers to whom I'm eternally grateful for teaching me, but I cannot think that a devoted parent who systematically wants to make sure that their kid gets a good education won't do a better job than the average teacher out there who has to deal with 30 kids and who soon becomes demotivated because he knows he hasn't got much say in the system. Another question, which is, you mentioned some curricula. I guess you can do some mix and match, buy a curriculum here and there. So how expensive is homeschooling? I assume it's probably cheaper than sending a kid to a private school, and definitely if you calculate the taxes that you pay to the state for education, it's probably cheaper. But what type of money are we talking about per year if it's not difficult for you to calculate the courses you have bought? Because I assume it's something like that, right? You go online and you buy a course.
Exactly right. Yeah, of course, the biggest expense is the taxes, right? I mean, I'm forced to pay for something that I don't want to use, right? So that's of course, and that's a big turnoff for a lot of people, right? They're like, well, they have to justify living in nice areas, right? Well, my kid, I need to put my kid in this school with these test scores, that's ranked this in the state, and then all these things, these kind of arbitrary things. So you're already kind of at a disadvantage, right? The truth is, I do not spend much money on curriculum. I think Mystery Science is about $100 for a year. And it's
$100. That's nothing.
For the experiments, you have to get kind of household supplies, rubber bands, paper clips, things of that nature. But we already have those around the house. Singapore math, I think, is about $130 for a full semester. We're talking about like maybe $500 total, for a year. It's really not that expensive. So anyone that says that that's a really big impediment, depending, of course, on the situation, but just generally, I don't buy it.
Okay. Now, again, people, everything that I say here, I'm Nikos, the interviewer. This is not, I have no institutional hat here. So my enthusiasm is 100% me as a person and my experience in the Greek educational system. And I'm totally bought on this idea. But let's see some more objections, right? So the obvious objection is, I don't even want to say it. What if the parent sucks? Because then someone say, okay, what if the teacher sucks? But I have to bring it up because someone will bring it up. Okay, what if the parent sucks? Then the child is stuck with the same sucky teacher forever. Well, what if the parent teaches them that, the Jews are inferior, or that God will hate you, whatever?
Well, my counter to that would be, if the parent sucks, the kid's going to be in big trouble no matter what, right? You can't, there's no miracles here, right? As part of being a parent is taking responsibility for your child's education. I think being a good parent is not simply putting food on the table and a roof over your head, right? You have to give them the tools to succeed, right? So, I mean, if the parent sucks, that's really unfortunate. I mean, there's probably something the community can do. I know some like churches or religious groups can kind of help out. Of course, it should be completely voluntary. The whole notion of force, we're against on principle, right? You shouldn't force Peter to pay for Paul or anything of that nature, but yeah, it's really unfortunate, and I don't have necessarily, a great objection. I mean, I just think that it's part of being responsible as a parent, right? I mean, but again, if the parent fails on their responsibility to educate their kid, they're just going to fail as a parent, just generally speaking. So I don't think education is that different in the sense of just giving them the tools to thrive in life in general.
Don't anyone quote me on this, but I think I remember Peikoff saying in one of the podcasts that there could be a ground for saying that the child's rights are violated if the parents offer zero education, like if they don't teach them even to read and write. But he says something like, if the parent gives the child the completely wrong ideas, like the ideas of, I don't know, like a religious fundamentalist, you assume that the child, when they start growing up, 16, 18, now they have the free will to test these ideas. So if I remember well, he claims that giving a bad education to your child is not a violation of the child's rights, except if it gets to the degree that you completely destroy the brain. For example, they don't even know how to teach right, or that they don't know that there's such a thing as grammar or something like that. But anyone who's interested in, you can check it on the Peikoff podcast. Okay, a couple of more objections. So okay. The most usual one. What about socialization? As if in the schools we get the best socialization, no one has a hard time. But the argument goes, at least you learn how to navigate the difficulties of life or the complex social dynamics. Whereas if you're insulated at home, then at some point, I don't know, you're 16 and here now you're out in the world. So what about this, Jeffrey? Is your daughter going to be antisocial and the school would be the solution?
I have a field day with this question, right? I get this. This is ironic. That's not surprising, given the collectivistic orientation that everyone has. This is the first question I get all the time. Forget about curriculum. Forget about it. It's how are they going to be socialized? Is she going to be awkward? So just generally speaking, right? If you think of your situation at school when you're younger, right? You go into a school, right? You start as a young child, right? 5, 6, 7 years old. You're not equipped with the maturity to handle these situations. You get kind of thrown into this dog-eat-dog world. Of course, in Ayn Rand, Compra Chicos, she kind of outlines this in detail, what happens, right? And that's what they call socialization, right? It doesn't matter what happens as long as you're around other kids, right? It just figure out what the group wants, kind of navigate to that orientation, and then you'll be fine. What I actually think happens when I get the objection of socialization is I think of it as kind of a package deal between being able to interact with children normally and learning socially, right? I think learning is a completely individualized thing, right? Only a mind can grasp knowledge, right? There's no collective knowledge and nothing collective about learning. And what I think people mean when they say socialization, only in a school context, is that kind of this learning happens socially, right? As distinct from just kind of interacting and learning kind of group dynamics, learning actual like group projects and things like that. They think these have some intrinsic value, which I think I reject outright. I think learning should be individual. You should be able to present your knowledge, kind of you can articulate it a certain way. But I think just, and of course, and to counter the kind of a package deal, they're lumped together. And, that's just how I navigate that question. I don't think so I think we got interrupted there.
Right. We lost you for a second, Jeffrey, or maybe I was, but we heard the essence of your answer. And my answer to that would be, so are you telling me that the kid would not be better off in terms of socialization if, let's say, as you said, you can do the basics and then at 12:30 they're done? How about at 1 o'clock they go to and learn, I don't know, basketball or jiu-jitsu, and they are among peers who like exactly the same thing, and also in an environment which is way more controlled. And then you learn competition, standing up for yourself, cooperation, being a team player or whatever that means. So there are other ways that you can socialize outside of school. In school, usually, as you said, you get the bad part of socialization. Michael Mallis said, with whom I generally disagree on many things, but on that he was spot on. He said school is the one place where the average person is going to face violence for the first and last time in their life. It's the only place where you're almost guaranteed to face violence. And the question is, like, why? Why does the kid have to go through that? Isn't there any other place? And is this the only way you can become capable and you can become resilient? So we heard at least 95% of your answer, and whatever I heard, I can tell you that I totally get how this, it's a weird argument that school kids can only be socialized at school. And one last question. So, okay, let's say the child starts with at homeschooling, but at some point they want to become, let's say, an architect, which means you have to enter a university, or you want to become a doctor. Somehow you have to enter the mainstream academia. What about credentials? So if you've been homeschooled from year 4, let's say, from the time you're 4 years old to the time you're 16 years old, then when you're 17 and you want to go to university, how can you prove to them that, hey, I'm good enough, I have the credentials?
Well, one thing is I know a whole lot of homeschoolers take the same standardized entrance exams into college, right? So they'll take in America, we have the ACT, the SAT. I mean, they test degrees of orders of magnitude higher. Of course, there might be some selection bias there, right? Just because it's not kind of random who's homeschooling, but on average, right? That's kind of I don't think that's an actual legitimate representation, because by the time they get there, they have, at least the way I see it, done properly, they'll have a lot of knowledge, be able to apply it. I mean, we take exams. I give my daughter an exam, kind of every week, really. So she's fully equipped to take a test and sit and, an exam. The other thing is, by the time they get to, anyone that's homeschooled gets to that level of education, think of how much baggage they don't have, right? In terms of just being, the social emotional baggage of being in that environment, right? They'll have a set, hopefully, ideally they have a set of values and principles that, they've cultivated. They have a strong set of interests. So they won't be as swayed, by kind of the bad philosophy, the bad group dynamics at that point in time, ideally, right? If it done properly, that's the way I see it. So they're fully equipped cognitively, they're fully equipped emotionally, given that they are engaged in sports or actually other extracurricular activities where they do get enough social interaction just to be like kind of navigate. I mean, we're social beings, right? We do need to navigate group dynamics and kind of trade for value and things like that. So, there's always an opportunity to do that. But I think by the time any student that the education's done proper, they get to that point, they should be well equipped.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. So let's see what the audience says. Marilyn, thank you very much for your contribution. Walter, thank you very much for your contribution as well. Our friend Philosophical Zombie Hunter asks, would you consider using artificial intelligence or ChatGPT for teaching your daughter?
Absolutely. I think that's an amazing tool, right? They can actually design curriculums, and you can actually, given that, you have enough knowledge, you probably have to have enough knowledge to navigate that tool in the first place. Otherwise it can be a little bit daunting. But you can use it for curriculum. You can actually put you can put into ChatGPT, give me a curriculum on this topic for this age group, and they'll outline something. And you, of course, can select it, and it might be a good resource actually. So maybe not use everything from ChatGPT, but then maybe you can kind of search on your own, integrate that into whatever curriculum you have. I definitely don't think these type of technologies are an enemy. They're definitely a friend of the homeschooling movement, and I think it's brilliant. I love it.
Marilyn, thank you for your contribution. She says, it's unlikely that the average, quote, bad parent would suck as much as the typical government school curriculum. Yeah, and again, I've had some teachers, I still remember them, that I consider myself blessed for having them. But the fact that I remember 3 of them from the, 60 teachers I've had throughout my school makes the point that they are the exceptions and not the rule. So, Jeffrey, I want to thank you for this discussion. I've learned a lot. Again, I came here having questions that were genuine questions, so I wasn't playing devil's advocate necessarily. I would encourage our producer to break down the episodes to YouTube chapters where each question is answered, so someone can come to this episode and see what were the topics we have covered. So, Jeffrey, any parting words? somewhere where other objectivists. Actually, let me ask you one last question, and then tell us whatever you want from in terms of yourself, how parents or other enthusiasts of homeschooling can communicate with you. But before that, let's say a parent starts from scratch. What are some good sources in your judgment, or good places to go to learn about homeschooling?
I mean, there's a lot of good resources. I know Kipod Learning, they actually fund micro schools. So if a parent, let's say, wants to actually, become a homeschool teacher themselves, that's one. It's a new startup tech company. They do some really good work. There's just a lot of general resources. I mean, just basically you can just Google search to get a good sense. But in terms of like curriculum, I think kind of objectives as a unique say and what type of curriculum we'll use. I suggest to everyone from math, Singapore math, just the conceptual orientation of it, the logical structure. It's great for kindergarten. I wouldn't necessarily start kind of formal training before kindergarten. I think they're just not ready. And then mystery science for science that starts again in kindergarten, probably around age 5 those are the two things. And then reading, there's a couple very good phonics, introduction to phonics, work that we did, reading in 100 lessons. I forget, I'm blanking on the author, but it's a very good introduction on phonics. Of course we have a little bit different take on it than maybe somebody like from a religious background or anything like that. But those general things, there's a lot of resources out there, but those kind of things, if you want some specific curriculum suggestions, those are what I would go with. Okay,
thank you very much, Jeffrey. And any way that people can follow what you do or get in touch with you in any way. So you are a part of our community. So obviously people members have access to you. And I think you were at Ocon last year. We've met there.
No, I haven't been to Ocon yet. I'm planning on attending this year. Will be the first year.
Yeah. So hopefully we're gonna meet also in real life. So thank you, Jeffrey. I want to tell you that I've learned things today, and I think this was a packed episode with information. So hopefully people will get answers to these questions. And I have to say, people, they're very eager to say, "Oh, the United States sucks." Yeah, the fact that you have at least the opportunity to teach your kids in the way you want, whereas here they have to go definitely to one of these government schools, because in a way, even private schools here are government schools. They have the same curriculum and the same structure. I have to say, yeah, this is something that still makes the United States special. Anyway, thank you very much, Jeffrey. Many thanks to our audience, to our contributors, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.